Hey, good evening, folks. Out on my evening walk. Check out that moon. It's a nice night, it's brisk out. Anyway, we gotta talk about this new song I just heard that's completely wrecked me. I discovered this newer band. I think they're pretty new. They're called Hot Mulligan, kind of like a punk style band. And the very first song I heard by them is called Backyard. And it's a melancholy song about having to grow up, leaving carefree youthfulness behind, childhood. Anyway, in that song, there's a lyric that he sings that says, "Play in the backyard where the spider webs and grass grows up next to us, grows up with us." It's like everything's living and moving and growing. And he says, tell me, what are your interests and how do you plan to give up on all of them? And it's kind of like, becoming an adult and leaving that creativity, and the childhood wonder behind, being often stuck in a, routine of work and just the mundaneness of being an adult. Anyway, that song really scratched the Peter Pan heart inside of me. But this isn't about that song. I've liked that song for a while now. Like I said, that was my first one I've heard from them. And they have others that are fun, kind of just upbeat. Like I said, more punk style. Think of like Blink-182, I guess. And the title of the song is called Monica Lewinsky. So obviously a play on Monica Lewinsky, but Skibbity at the end. And even though it has a silly name, it's a very tragic song. So as is true with any good movie or story or song, they tell a story, if they can bring you along where you experience that, you experience the emotions of that story. And in the song, he's telling the story about being far away from a loved one. You know how musicians often travel, but I believe it's his mother, because he talks about regretting not being a good son. And then he talks about bringing her flowers, which is why I think it's a feminine, probably his mother. There's a piece we can all relate to, because as I said before, growing up and having jobs and living in different places, life often gets in the way, and then we don't see our loved ones as often as we should. And throughout the progression of the song, he talks about being in Tokyo, miles away, and he talks about, there's a part where he says, hey, when the weather's nice, we'll see each other again. And he says, I'll bring you flowers. And as the song continually progresses, it tells the story of what most of us can relate to. Like I said, we have these plans and we make these plans, but life gets in the way, and we never follow through, or we don't follow through as often as we like. And before we know it, that time is like sand through the hourglass. We don't have as much of it as we'd like to believe we do. Anyway, towards the end of the song, like I said, it's building up to this, hey, when the weather's nice, I'll come, we'll see each other, I'll bring you flowers. He reminisces about, he says, where you raised me, the places we used to skip rocks, as kind of being grown up and overgrown, like, illustrating how time has changed the familiar things that they once held in common. And now life has gotten in the way and they've drifted apart, Like I said, things we can all relate to. And there's a lyric where he talks about cattails overgrowing in the ditch where they used to cross the road and go down to the creek and skip rocks. And he talks about the town nothing being familiar left, you know, everything being broken down or changed, you know, the hands of time, nothing familiar remaining. And towards the end of the song, you know, to close out the story, the lyrics go, "It's 5 a.m. here in Tokyo, I'm half a world away. I'm sitting in a parking lot and you're laying in your grave. And I'm scared of you now that it's all done, knowing that I didn't try hard enough to be a proper son." And he talks about the memory of you scares me now, and maybe some of you can relate to that. It's like there's a guilt, you know, there's a guilt that you weren't there, you didn't spend that time, you didn't make that effort, and then it's too late. And even the memory, the idea of that, the shame and the guilt you're afraid of, you're afraid to face it. Anyway, it wrecked me, like I said. And I think it's because it's something we all relate to, you know? We all can relate to that. So anyway, like I said, yeah, wrecked me. And you should give it a listen. And if it doesn't take you there, if it doesn't wreck you as well, maybe you should check your pulse.